Hi everyone, tarekith here, and I know it's been a while since I've done a review, and since I recently picked up a Teenage Engineering OP-1, guess what we're going to do today. So just a quick overview really fast, and then I'll get into some more details about how this works and show everybody a little more about what exactly this thing can do, because I know there's a lot of questions about how capable is it, how does it sound, that sort of thing. The first thing you notice when you get one of these is it's actually a lot more solid feeling than you would expect looking at the pictures online. The base and the sides are all a solid piece of aluminum. There's a real heft to it. It doesn't feel cheap at all. The knobs felt a little flimsy at first, but once they kind of broke in a little bit, they feel much better now. I don't have any worries about those. The keys themselves are not velocity sensitive. They're just standard little chiclets or kind of QWERTY keys like you'd find on a laptop. They seem to work fine. I've heard some people have issues with them popping off, but so far I've carried mine around quite a bit and haven't had any problems that way. There's a built-in small 1-inch speaker, a small little mic. There's also a battery indicator. Teenage Engineering says this gets about 18 hours of battery life, which is pretty amazing, I think, for what it's capable of. On the side, where all the connections are, there's a stereo input, although everything gets recorded in mono. Stereo output, both on 1/8-inch jacks, as well as a USB port, and you can send MIDI to this via the USB port. I know a lot of people on the Teenage Engineering site are using like the iConnect MIDI interfaces to hook up controller keyboards to this. I don't know if that helps it respond to velocity or not. I'll have to look into that. And then of course a power switch. So that's mostly the basics. I did also get the carry case for this. Like I said, I like to travel a lot. People who follow my blog know that I use an iPad and iPhone to make music on the go. So with one of these I can throw it in my camelback and hop on my bike and not feel like I'm going to damage it. I did think the case was kind of expensive. This is the Teenage Engineering case. It's $80. I'm sure you could probably make something else. I had a trip coming up. I didn't really have time to deal with making something, so I ended up just buying this. It's really well made for what it is. There's memory foam in the top and the bottom. I did think for a device that's so portable, they put an awful lot of padding around the outsides, the sides itself, which is probably the strongest part of the unit. Kind of a shame. I think probably the case could have been a little smaller, but anyway, it does work, and if you're worried about traveling with your OP-1, it's worth the investment. So anyway, that's just a quick overview. Let's zoom in a little closer and see what this thing can do. Thanks. Okay, so here we are zoomed in a little closer so you can see what's going on with the OP-1. As you can see, there's a really nice display, super sharp graphics. It's a little dimmer than I expected, to be honest. Outside in direct sunlight, forget it, you're not going to be able to see it. Even in the shade outside sometimes it can be a little dim and hard to see. In the studio in here it's not really a problem, but just something to be aware of if you're playing festivals or that sort of thing. The overall architecture of the OP-1 is pretty simple to understand. There's a synthesizer section, a drum section, your tape machine, and then like a mixer master output section. So I'll just go through those one at a time here so you can kind of get an overview of what's included with the OP-1. The synthesizer and the drum section both follow pretty simple architectures. You have like your oscillator section, which is this first screen. The second screen is your envelope. Third screen is effects. You can apply a bunch of different effects to every single preset. And the last screen is your LFO, and the LFO is actually more than just a standard LFO. You can do things like use the external input to modulate parameters. The OP-1 has a built-in FM radio. You can actually tune the radio and use that as like an LFO modulation source, or even record that and mess with it later on, like to slice up drum sounds you recorded from the radio, that sort of thing. There's about, I don't know, 8 or 9 different synth models included in the synthesizer section. And you can see they have pretty unusual displays, not the kind of thing you're used to. And they all react to what's actually happening in the module as you play too, which is nice. It's some good visual feedback. This is like an FM synth. There's also a built-in sampler in both the synthesizer section and the drum section. The synth sampler can hold up to 6 seconds of audio, and the drum sampler can hold up to 12 seconds of audio. You can record things to the tape if you want and say copy it from the tape to the sampler, so you can resample and re-effect things pretty easily all internally in the unit. Let's see. The envelope's pretty basic. Pretty easy to understand what's going on here. Simple ADSR. Sorry. The effects are a little more interesting, let's put it that way. This is sort of a delay. But there's also some slightly weirder effects. You have the cow. And if I remember correctly, this effect was actually created by Magnus Lindstrom of Sonic Charge, who does like the Microtonic Synth and Synplant. So pretty different stuff here. You've got grid. This is more like a sort of a reverb effect. And again, none of the effects in here are exactly what you would expect. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. Nitro is a filter. Kind of like the electron filter if you've used that. There's like a combined low pass, high pass, and the stick shift controls the resonance. And the green controls like a follower, like an envelope follower. There's a phone effect for lo-fi things. And then you can call it Mike Tyson if you want. This is kind of like a compressor, distortion, saturator unit. Again, none of these things are really straightforward as far as like what you would expect a standard compressor to do. But that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It really encourages you to experiment. So anyway, like I said, it's the synth section. And then you have the LFOs. There's quite a few different LFO types. There's a bend LFO. You can use like some of the little attachments to hook up to the knobs, and you can actually use like a pitch bender, make a pitch bender. There's a crank LFO. You can use a you can turn the LFO manually if you want. The element LFO, you can use XY coordinates. You can actually tilt the unit, use the radio to modulate things, use the external mic to modulate things. MIDI LFO, a random LFO, standard tremolo. There's a lot of different LFOs here, and you can assign them to all the parameters of the synth and effects engines, as well as the envelope. So quite a bit of scope for some real sound mangling inside each synth engine. So that's the synths. Like I said, there's a bunch of different models. FM, there's like a phase synth, sampler, this pulse synth. Quite a lot in there, more than you'd expect. There's a lot of variety of sounds you can get, everything from really super deep basses to, you know, importing your own samples of whatever you want. So I don't think you'd get sick of this anytime soon. The next section here is the drum section. By default, the way drums work in the OP-1 is you can put a bunch of different hits into a single 12-second audio file, and then you can go in here and internally define the start and end points for every key. So, oops, I have some effects on here. Let me turn these off. So you can actually create your own drum kits if you want. This is one of the ones I've done. And as you can see, as I press a key, there's like an overview of the entire sample at the top here, and you can see like the highlighted section move for each key. So you can define the start and end points for every single key. You can define playback if it's forward, backward, reverse. And again, you can store up to 8 presets if you want, just by holding one of these keys down. It'll save it to your snapshot folder. And there's separate snapshot folders for both the drums and the synths. So it's really easy to save your own sounds and get them back later on. You don't have to use the built-in presets at all if you don't want to. The envelope in the drum section is a little different. It's a little more geared towards transient shaping. Oops. So it looks a little funky, but once you start using it, it makes sense. You can delay the transients, you can make them sharper or duller, that kind of thing. It's definitely more suited toward drum work. Overall, I think the drum sampler is pretty capable in this. I've imported my own samples, and they actually sound pretty good coming out of the OP-1. One thing to remember, though, everything you import does get converted to mono, which is sort of a bummer, but that's just the way it is. So that's the drum and synth sections. You know, right off the bat, they look kind of basic as far as what you can do. But one thing to remember, too, with these is that there's also built-in sequencers in the OP-1, and again, they're kind of quirky. Here's the list of sequencers. There's an endless sequencer, which is kind of like an arpeggiator. You can define this speed. You can set which notes play at every single step. You can even input chords, holds, rests, that kind of thing at every step. So a little more flexible than you would think, just like everything else inside of this. There's the finger sequencer. And basically every single one of these keys can be a different pattern, and you can choose to have the sequencer set up so that pressing another key will blend the two patterns together or switch to the next pattern, as well as a couple other options. Again, lots of flexibility here. There's also a standard pattern sequencer, a 1-bar pattern sequencer, where you can enter specific notes. This works in the drum grid as well, so it's great if you want just like a really standard way to come up with, you know, synced drum sounds. Again, only 1 bar though. There's the sketch sequencer, which you can use to actually draw like Etch-a-Sketch style notes. And what will happen is the basically scans through whatever is drawn and plays notes based on where there's lines. This is the default little Marks was right thing that came with the OP-1. I haven't used this too much, but there's quite a bit of fun you can do there. And then there's this fun little tombola sequencer, which lets you can drop notes, drop little balls every time you press a note. You control the speed, you can change the shape of it, you can make it so the balls can't ever leave. So again, there's a lot of experimentation. It reminds me again of the Electron boxes, where there's a good interaction between the sequencer and the synth parameters that creates things you wouldn't normally expect. One thing to keep in mind about the sequencers, it's sort of a downside, is for all of these sequencer types, they're live all the time. There's no presets for the sequencer, so if you go in there and make a mistake while programming the sequencer, like that's it. You've got to go back and recreate everything. You can't store like a sequence with the preset. There's just one endless sequence, one finger sequence, one pattern sequence. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. It'd be nice if there was ways to store, you know, different patterns and things, because that'd be really useful for live use, but unfortunately that's just the way it is. So that is the sequencers, the synth engine, and the drum engine. And the next let me turn this off. The next step is the tape machine, and this is a 4-track tape machine. Audio, everything is recorded audio. In the OP-1 there's no MIDI recording for the most part, other than the pattern sequencers. You get 4 tracks, up to 6 minutes long recordings, that's it. There's also the option to record to what they call an album, which lets you take all 4 tracks and mix them down to a stereo file, or say jam on a synth, or do some of the tape tricks live while you're recording too. And there's a little bit of flexibility here. 6 minutes might be kind of short for some people, but I think it works. In addition to this, you can loop sections of the tape. Let's do this, set the out point. So it's really good and simple to build up quick grooves if you want, you know, little 4-bar grooves. If you want, you can slice up sections of the tape, different tracks, and copy those to one of the samplers, or just move them around here on the timeline. You can move around bar to bar as well. It's pretty flexible, a lot more flexible than you would expect. The ability to actually cut up the audio and rearrange things helps a lot. I like it because, you know, when you're playing with things, you can just be recording to audio in the background, and when you're done, connect it to your computer, and each of these 4 tracks shows up as just an audio file internally on the OP-1, so you can just drag those audio files to live or whatever DAW you're using and continue working from there. So finally, the last section here is the mixer section. You can set the levels and pan for all the 4 tracks. There's a global EQ you can use, and again it kind of reacts to what you're doing, which is kind of cool. They're almost more like filters than a standard EQ. You can apply a global effect. This is like a delay, for instance. And then the last output section has your meters for the main outputs. You can bounce left and right outputs, and there's also a drive which kind of acts like a limiter compressor with adjustable release. And for the most part, you know, in subtle settings, it sounds pretty good, I think. So that's a quick overview of everything inside the OP-1. As you can see, there's not a lot going on as far as how many different pages you have to go through to make sounds. I think the Teenage Engineering's done a really good job of giving you a minimum amount of controls with a lot of flexibility in how they shape the sounds. But the downside of that is they use some kind of weird conventions, so it takes a while to kind of understand and learn, like, you know, what does the cow sound like on my synth sound, or how is the boxer going to affect my drum patches, things like that. But you know, that's a good thing. Again, I think it really encourages you to experiment and just kind of play around and see what you come up with. And I think that really is the beauty of something like the OP-1. So let's go to a quick review. Okay, so that was just a quick overview of some of the capabilities of the OP-1. I know I didn't go into great depth about all the different synth engines and the drum engines. There's also a drum synth I didn't cover that's got 2 oscillator drum synth. You can set parameters for every single key to make your own like synthesized drum kits. The reason I didn't go into much depth is just because, quite honestly, the manual is pretty short and well written. So if you want a little more info about what this is capable of as far as the nitty-gritty, you know, a 30-page manual isn't really too much to ask people to dive into. So what do I think of this? I have to say I'm actually kind of impressed. It does a lot more than I expected. I've wanted one of these since they first came out. It's portable. It's got a really different interface, which I like. I've mentioned before, I'm getting a little kind of burned out on standard subtractive synthesis. I kind of held off for a few years just because I was worried it'd be a bit of a one-trick pony in terms of what kind of sounds I could get out of it. You know, like everybody else, I watched a lot of the demos on YouTube and things, and it sounded okay, but it's hard to tell sometimes just going by those. So I was pleasantly surprised at just how capable this is. There's different synthesis methods, from FM synthesis, phase synthesis, the built-in samplers. The overall sound quality is great. I mean, you can get really harsh digital textures or these really warm, I won't say analog, but really warm sounds that, you know, in a mix might pass for analog. There's definitely a lot more capability here than you would expect in terms of sound quality and the amount of sounds you can make. Downsides, I wish the display was a little brighter. For being a unit that's so portable and just begs to be taken outside, it can be a little hard to see in bright light. The keys themselves are probably the cheapest part of the whole thing. I mean, it is what it is. It's a small little unit, and for what is here, I think it's a very fair price, but it would have been great if these were at least velocity sensitive. I can dream of having like Q-Nexus style keys on this one day. That would be awesome. Probably not going to happen. But yeah, I think the thing I like the most about this is it kind of makes music making more of an exploratory experiment again. It reminds me of when I first started getting into making music and I was just playing with sound. I didn't know what all the parameters did. It just encourages you to dive in and get dirty and just start tweaking things and see what happens. I think once you learn the different synth parameters and the effects parameters, it'd be easy to kind of quickly dial in sounds based on what you hear in your head. But at the same time, there's a lot of interaction between the effects, both master effects, synth effects, and the pattern sequencers, that it just leads to results you don't expect. And the fact that the whole time you can have just like an audio recording going in the background capturing all your experiments is great. I personally don't really record to MIDI very much, so just having audio files to grab for later is awesome. The other thing I really like about the OP-1 is that they did a great job of making backups and transferring files to your computer really, really simple and brain dead. Hook this up to your computer, put it in disk mode, and you can grab all the 4 tracks as audio files. You can grab the excuse me, side A and side B master recordings as audio files. Even the synth presets themselves, when you store a synth preset you like, it's actually stored as an audio file with the information in the WAV file header. So you can actually hear a quick preview of all your sounds while you're actually moving the presets around, which is great. It's just a brilliant way of doing things. The one thing I did find a little surprising was there's no mention of how much memory this thing has. There's a quick mention in the manual, but I have no idea how many presets you can hold manually, things like that. That's kind of surprising. I haven't had a chance to dig into that much, but other than that and a couple of other small little niggles I had, I actually really impressed with this. It makes a lot greater variety of sounds than I expected. The sound quality is fine for me. I have no problems whatsoever using this in any professional production. And it's pretty hard to beat 18 hours of battery life in something you can just throw in your backpack and make music wherever you go. Probably not what most people would consider the core part of their setup in the studio, only because it does, you know, lack some things like velocity, sensitivity, and things like that. But if you're looking for something fun to kind of just experiment with and play around with, come up with new ideas you might not have expected, it's pretty hard to beat this. Overall, I'm really impressed. I think Teenage Engineering did a great job packing a lot of functionality into a really small package, giving it like a totally new interface that just encourages you to play around and just listen to what you're doing instead of sort of pre-planning how you come up with your sounds. And yeah, it sounds great. It's a ton of fun to use, so I would say 2 thumbs up. And that's about it for the review. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I will be happy to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks a lot.